All right, guys, this is a little bit of a longer lesson, but it's the only lesson for this module. So it's kind of got all of the information here all in one place. So just kind of bear with me through these notes, and we'll get through Module 3 pretty quickly, okay? So first thing I want to highlight are the inequality symbols. So let's just make sure that we understand what those are. Less than, greater than, these would not be equal to. These would be like open dots on a graph. And then we have less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. So these would be closed dots on the graph. And we always have to make sure that we are reading from the variable, and that'll make some more sense kind of as I move through this. But you always got to make sure to read from the variable's perspective. I like to just make it nice and simple and just say bigger than, smaller than. If you have ever heard the saying, alligator eats the bigger meal, you kind of look at the inequality signs kind of like an alligator's mouth. So in this case, with this sign up here, the alligator would be eating this meal. So this meal right here would be bigger than whatever is over here. Okay. So let's kind of work through some examples. It'll make more sense as we go. Okay. All right. So let's look at numbers 1 and 2. All right. So on number 1, I see my indicator number is -2 over here. That's bigger. -4 would be smaller because we're in negative land. Then I need to decide what kind of dot I have. So since this is equal to, it's going to be a closed dot. And then I think about the alligator. This says y is smaller than -3 because the alligator is not eating y. So y is smaller, so shading smaller would be back this way. Okay, looking at number 2, I stick my indicator number 2 there. I get one bigger, one smaller, so I get 3 numbers on that number line. This one, you can see from the inequality sign, is not equal to. So since it's not equal to, that gives me an open dot at 2. Okay, and then you always read from the variable's perspective. This says x is bigger than 2, right? Because the alligator's eating x. So x is bigger, so I want to shade bigger. Okay, so that's what I say. You can see these two signs, other than the equal to part, are the same, right? But on one I shade to the left, on one I shade to the right. That's because the variable's in a different spot. Okay, so you just got to be careful with that. So go ahead and try these problems that are on here, 4 and 5. Go ahead and pause the video, try 4 and 5, and then you can play the video when you're ready for me. All right, number 4, we have -8 as our indicator number. I want to get one bigger, -7, one smaller, number 9. This inequality sign is not equal to, so it's going to be an open dot. And then the inequality says b is bigger than -8. So I want to shade bigger. All right, number 5, I get my indicator number of 4 on there. One bigger, one smaller. Since my inequality is equal to this time, I put my closed dot in there. And then read from the variable's perspective, g is smaller than 4. So g is smaller than 4. So I'm coming back here, smaller than 4. Okay? All right, so that's our first skill. Now let's flip it on its head. Now what if, instead of giving me the inequality, you gave me the graph, and then I had to write the inequality? These are pretty simple. Okay? So how I always like to start is I'll start with x, and I'll start with my indicator number. So x and 48, wherever that dot is, that's kind of the indicator number. So we have x and 48. The shading is x. So the shading is bigger, so x has to be bigger, and it is a closed dot, so it's got to be equal to. That simple. Okay, so I would get x and 52. The shading is smaller, so x has to be smaller. It is an open dot, so it's not equal to, so that's done as it is. Okay. Number 9, x and my indicator number of -6. The shading is bigger, so x has to be bigger. It is a closed dot, so it's got to be equal to, and that's that. Okay. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward there. Go ahead and try 10 and 11. So pause the video, try 10 and 11, and then you can play the video when you're ready. All right, for number 10, x and 12. shading is smaller, so x is smaller. It is not equal to, so we don't put the equal to part underneath. On 11, x, oops. Sorry if there was a jump in the video there. Accidentally hit a weird button. Okay, so x and 62. The shading is bigger, so x has to be bigger. And it is a closed dot, so it's equal to. Okay, so that's our second skill. Let's go ahead to the back page. All right, so now we have a little bit of solving in here. Okay, so the nice part is we just got done with equations. So we solve it the exact same way as an equation. So same opposite operations. So to get rid of a minus 3, my opposite operation would be plus 3, plus 3. So we have x, the inequality sign stays the same. Negative 4 plus 3 is negative 1. And now that's my inequality. Now I graph it. So indicator number in the middle, 1 bigger, 1 smaller. It is not equal to, so it's an open dot. And then read from the variable's perspective, it says x is smaller than negative 1. So x is smaller than negative 1, so I'm shading smaller. Okay, so just do your opposite operations. Once you get your final inequality, it's just like we did on the front. So go ahead and try 14 and 15, and then you can start the video back up. All right, 14, first thing we need to make sure we see is minus a negative. So that changes to plus a positive. Opposite operation to get rid of a positive 1 is subtract 1 from both sides. So I have s, inequality sign stays the same. 2 minus 1 is 1. So I get my indicator number on there, 1 bigger, 1 smaller. It is equal to, so I have a closed dot at 1. And read from the variable, it says s is bigger than 1. So shade bigger, and you're done. Number 15, to get rid of a negative 3, my opposite operation is add 3. Add 3. This looks kind of weird, but it's not really that weird. Negative 3 plus 3 is 0, and that's okay. Inequality sign doesn't change, and I'm left with h over here. So indicator number this time is going to be 0, 1 bigger, 1 smaller. I do not have an equal to part, so an open dot at 0, and read from the variable, right? This says h is smaller than 0. So I'm making sure to shade smaller than 0. All right, so we put together the solving that we learned last module and the graphing that we learned this module on the first page, okay? One more tricky rule that we need to talk about, okay? When you multiply or divide by a negative number, you have to flip the inequality sign. So this is the one special rule for inequalities versus equations. Equations, you don't have to worry about flipping anything because the sign is the sign, right? It's an equal sign no matter what. With inequality signs, if we ever move from negative land to positive land by multiplying or dividing by a negative number, we have to make sure and flip our inequality sign. Okay, so let's look at number 16. So negative 4m is negative 4 times m. So my opposite operation would be divide by negative 4. Okay, so I have m, and since I divided by a negative, I got to flip my inequality sign. So this was bigger or equal. Now it's going to be smaller or equal. The equal to part stays the same. So if it's equal to, it's equal to. If it's not, it's not. And then negative 16 divided by negative 4 is positive 4. So then I get my indicator on there. 1 bigger, 1 smaller. This is equal to, so I have a closed dot at 4. And it says m is smaller. So I'm shading m smaller. Number 18, I need to distribute my negative into the parentheses. And realize I'm not multiplying both sides by a negative, so this is not where I flip my inequality sign. So 8, inequality sign stays the same. Negative 4 times d is negative 4d. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. And then I just proceed with my opposite operation. So I add 4 to both sides. 12 is less than or equal to negative 4d. Divide by negative 4. And this is when I'm actually dividing by a negative on both sides, right? So 12 divided by negative 4 is negative 3. I have to flip my inequality sign, so now it's bigger or equal. And I have just a regular d over here. Okay? So my indicator number is negative 3. One bigger is -2. One smaller is -4. It is equal to, so I have a closed dot at -3. And read from the variable, it says D is smaller than -3, right? Because the alligator is eating -3, so D is smaller, so I need to shade smaller. All right, go ahead and try 18 and 19. I will warn you, 18 is a little tricky, so be careful with it. But try 18 and 19, and then you can play the video. All right, so what makes 18 tricky is that we just practiced flipping the inequality sign when we divide by a negative. But on 18, we're not dividing by a negative, right? We're dividing by 6. So what I want to warn you about, and the reason this problem is on here, is if you're doing a negative number divided by a positive, that's not when you flip your inequality sign. The only time I'm going to flip my inequality sign is if these numbers down here that I'm actually dividing by are negative. So I'm left with it. My inequality sign is not going to change, and then -30 divided by 6 is -5. So get your indicator number on there. One bigger, one smaller. This one's going to be an open dot because it's not equal to, and it says X is smaller, so I shade smaller. Okay, number 19, I have to divide by -16. Okay, 48 divided by 16 would be 3, so that's -3. I divided by a negative on both sides, so I have to flip my inequality sign. Okay, and then I'm left with F over here. So indicator number is -3, one bigger, one smaller. I'm going to have a closed dot because it is equal to. And then read from the variable, F is smaller because it's not getting eaten than -3. F is smaller than -3, so I'm shading smaller. All right, those are your inequality notes.